All right. Thank you for joining me today. My name's Alexi Bailey, and this is the Tell It Like It Is podcast. We have a very special guest today, Mike. Glad to have you, Mike. Thank you for finally making this happen.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And, for the record, this
it's
is
cool.
my first in person podcast, not recorded
Mm,
separately via Zoom.
yeah,
Still recording via Zoom, but not. Yeah.
I think um, something we could talk about is I'm like, and I feel like it's actually getting worse the older I get. I'm like more of an analog person in, in a very digital age.
Right.
So I like, I don't know. And I've done a lot of the Zoom meetings and like training sessions and like, so I'm used to it, but I still don't like them. So when you said this, I was like, oh no, like, in person.
I don't think anyone prefers electronic.
People do know.
That's scary
Yeah.
to even say that. Like maybe you kind of like it sometimes, but it's scary when you start to say, I'd rather not see you, just Zoom me or something, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I think it might take a while, but something, not so much now, but, um, thinking about meeting people after you get out of environments like college and stuff where you're like in close proximity to the same people all the time, outside of just a work setting. Like, I feel like it gets very hard to meet people. And I think like on some level, there was probably a greater amount of people that had a greater amount of negative feelings about having to be at an office, at least at the beginning when this first started.
Right.
But I think over time, and they might not connect it to this, I think it's a larger problem. But over time, the limited ways to meet people without work at all, really, because it's so hard now. I mean, every event I've been to, like, I just finished school, and so I was doing like a lot of like meetings for that, and going to like different lecture series, and there's a lot of kind of town hall forum kind of things that they would put together. So I was on a lot of different types of Zoom meetings, and nothing ever replaced the way you can make a social connection, like go into the bathroom at the same time as someone else who's at the thing with you. Which for me is always when I actually get to know someone at those kind of things. Um, and I think long term people are going to miss that. And I haven't, breakout rooms are kind of a better maybe step in the right direction, but still takes more effort, I feel like.
I mean, we can all agree.
I'd be interested to see like a 10-year effect of a sudden drop off in office life.
Assuming we're not going to go back.
I don't think we will. Definitely not to the degree where we were.
I mean, maybe not 100%, but I'm comfortable saying at least 90, 95 for the average workplace.
Mm.
For a workplace like Google, maybe the number will be lower, but I would say the return to work for most jobs would be 90+%. And maybe they'll return and then over time realize they can stay virtual, but there is going to be an initial return, I would say, to 90%.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's something I think might happen slowly because, like, I've read like, I've been a fan of the idea of a 4-day work week,
right?
And I think in terms of employee productivity, it doesn't really make that much of a difference because I worked a job where it was a 4-day week,
right,
for a while, and I was in a different department than the rest of the company.
Right.
So it was only our department where some of the people got this 4-day week thing, but still we were built into the 5-day week workflow, and like we always kept up with it. Like if not, way ahead of it by Thursday.
Right.
And so I think the productivity like fills in. What I've seen makes a difference apparently is how more efficient other types of communication are outside of just like productivity, but more the creativity.
Some people have said like communication went way down because they were only communicating via email.
Yeah, and there's a lot of what I've seen. What's missing in not being in person is a lot more communication, like on a regular basis. But then on top of that, it's more full information because there's all of these other like nonverbal communication. I just got a master's in social work, so a lot about people.
Right.
And a big thing that I was blown away by is they say 97% of communication is nonverbal. There's a lot, being in person in an office, there's just a lot more communication going on.
Right.
And inevitably, it gets you ahead as a company to things and through things faster than companies that aren't. That's always been the hesitation when like a startup or something has tried to not do it.
Right.
And they tend to fall to the wayside, and why we haven't seen a massive shift to it like we saw with this. So it's interesting to see what you're saying. Some companies will definitely want it back. Will they get an advantage like really quickly? And it'll be like natural selection.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. Interesting times. A lot of interesting times.
Yeah.
Interesting decade coming up.
I mean, I don't think that's a big deal, but it can have a major impact on job retention and all of those kinds of things.
True.
You mentioned social work school. What are some things you think that the average person would benefit from going to social work school? So basically, something that the average person's walking around without knowledge of.
Yeah.
And you learn this in social work school.
I think social work's good because it's a 2-year program, and the majority of your time from the beginning is spent doing some kind of in-field internship. So your first, I think this is, if it's not like this in every, I don't know if this is federal, but that I think pretty much every state is like this.
Right.
Like to have like a certified program. There's a lot of state regulations on it, and so part of it is you got to do 15 hours a week your first year, and then I think 23 your second year, and then class time's a lot, but it's not as much.
Right.
And so with that though, like we're studying like a lot of psychology, like how to help people. The way I like to think about it is how do you make emotions more well spent? Not to get rid of them. Right. And I think that's what's unique about social work is because I think, business school and management school and strategies, and industrial psychology, I think a lot of it is how do you, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with this, but I think there's the ideal employee is someone who doesn't let negative emotions enter into their work at all.
Right.
And everything is about how do we achieve that, knowing that it's
gets in the way of
negative emotion. And I think what's industrial psychology is good because it's very focused on how do we foster positive emotion.
Right.
I would say. If there's anything I learned, like studying mental health and stuff, it's that the negative emotions are there. They're a part of you. You thought them, so they're there now. And anything that tries to not fully like acknowledge that and just kind of try to integrate and then be bigger, okay? Rather than what I see the trend mostly be is like, how do we get them out of here? How do we make you not care that you have them?
Right.
And I feel like, so in industrial psychology, it's more that. And then like management strategies, it's definitely like emotions shouldn't really be a big thing. You know, ideally they wouldn't be. And so I think social work's unique because I think it's one of those few kind of fields of study that are like all emotions are here, therefore they're important. And like, and now how do we, something I like saying to people is like, how do we suffer well? And again, maybe that's a bit for like a corporate perspective, but in terms of a life perspective, it's like, you know, I think there's a lot of that social work can bring. It's like, how do you accept the full range of a person and feelings that you have and bring that to a functional life, you know? And how do you build functionality around that rather than building functionality around this idea that we could potentially always be positive and never had negative emotions. So let's like build a life around that. And then when the negative stuff comes in, it doesn't really fit in anymore. So I think it's a deep perspective.
What makes it negative? The emotions.
You know, I mean, that just run
because they impede.
I think
in that context.
So broadly speaking, in terms of the nervous system,
yeah,
there's going to be the emotions are the nervous system. You know, so yeah, I mean, the way emotions relate to your nervous system, I think, is like fascinating, but it's a good way to think about them. Ultimately, it's like your nervous system has like two settings, like basically either relaxed, healing, or stressed, drawing energy.
Right.
And that's it. That stressed equals drawing energy, and like putting it to work somehow. That's what is unhealthy about it, because now it's taking energy from the wrong things.
I got you.
Too often. But so negative emotions are anything that's going to activate stress. So yeah, shame, fear.
Sure.
I would say are at the end of the day the main two.
Right.
But you know, anger, sadness, again, secondary to shame and fear.
So the takeaway would be people would learn to manage their emotions better.
Yeah, and I think that's what we see like in terms of insensitivity from like management and this idea of the corporate world being cold. Right. It's like it's all, even if they do embrace positivity and that side of emotion and like trying to foster that a lot. Mm-hmm. There still hasn't been much space given to negative feelings. What is changing is, we kind of saw this recently with Simone Biles, is like acceptance of the negativity, but that means there's no room for you. So we'll give you a break rather than build it into the day. And that's not a commentary on like what Simone Biles, I think, building what she was experiencing into athletic performance is like, that relies a lot on the emotions that are in your body as well. Mm. So I could see how, and again, you can't control emotions.
Can you give a little bit of backstory?
But for work,
this Simone thing.
For work, you can bring some negativity in your body to sit at a computer. You know,
right?
Some negativity in your body to doing crazy flips. That's different. You know, but the work environment could allow for that more, but it doesn't. You can not come in, and they won't dog you about it. Maybe, hopefully, they'll say. But
legally,
it's not built in.
Legally, they shouldn't. Can you give a little background on the Simone Biles thing?
She,
one of the greatest gymnasts of all time.
Yeah.
Young, athletic, African American, made it the women's gymnastic team.
Hey, you can argue about best of all time, but she has like the most medals and like the most records. So some
it's debatable. I said one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Like she's earned that much. Mm-hmm. Right?
Oh, I'm saying though, it kind of, there is some objective stuff behind saying that, because I feel like you hear goat about a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what happened? She got to Tokyo.
So, well, I think, I don't want to project and get in her head, but since 4 years ago, where she really came on the map, exploded onto the map in a huge way, she's been inducted into modern day pop culture.
Right.
So, you know, and that's Instagram and who knows like what else, you know, having to be on magazines and stuff. Yep. And it's like
Wheaties box.
Yeah. But different athletes were always on the Wheaties boxes.
Yeah.
They weren't always like on Vogue.
Right.
And I don't know what magazine she's done, but there was like fashion, maybe something more along the lines of Cosmo, Time. Right. I mean, every magazine.
She's an icon of the generation.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really brought into pop culture.
Right.
And pop culture, I think, is, you know, its values are all over the place. I think they can lend themselves to a lot of negative emotions. You know, a lot of externalizing your self-worth. I don't feel it almost demands that, and I feel like coming off of that, like the same thing with Naomi Osaka. She's a tennis player, and how old is she? Like 19, 20? Really young. And when she started, she was like, when she came on the map, she was like 19.
Yeah. Early 20s.
And like, the same thing recently, like she was like, I can't do the press conferences anymore because it's like too stressful. So I think, but anyway, so you're seeing this kind of, I feel like an acknowledge of fallibility in athletics.
All right.
But Simone Biles, I ain't finished. So, but basically, I don't know how early it started with how early, if it was practice or she made it through the first round or something. I haven't been following the Olympics.
Right.
But basically, I know like the practice session that day, at least leading up to this performance, she was getting what they call the twisties, which is basically, you know, the balance is a part of the brain.
Right.
With gymnasts, it has to be very, very developed because they need to literally have a sense of where they're oriented as they're doing like 360s on multiple axes.
Sure.
And so obviously it's got to be complex. I could see how like if you're emotionally not fully grounded, that's going to be a vulnerable part of the brain. So apparently she was getting the twisties leading up, and then she went out, and I think pretty early into the event, she like didn't do well, and commentators were saying it looked like she got lost in the air, and she just like checked out. And honestly, I think she could have left it at I was having issues with like I was having neurological, maybe that's strong, but it could have been phrased as I was having like medical or like scientific issues like with.
She did the right thing.
I think so. What's big is that she said that she wasn't. I forget what her words were basically, but she wasn't in the headspace, and she was being. There was a lot of mental taxation on her leading up to it, where she was like, it wasn't going to be safe, and I wasn't going to serve the team better by being there anymore. And it really went against this idea of like, you know, this lady from the 80s who like broke her ankle and still did the event and won. Like this idea that athletes need to move on. What makes them inspiring is to like win, no matter what.
Right.
So I think it was interesting, but to one of my sayings is nothing is mutually exclusive if they exist. That's a big one. But I think this is an example of how thinking like that could have actually elevated something like this. Because I think there were like two flaws in it. One was that she was attributing her twisties to feeling stressed and off. And it's like, I think that's where people fail to acknowledge how tied to your brain and processes out of your control that are just biology, emotions are. So it attaches this mysticism to them. And for people who don't want to acknowledge them, there's nothing hard there to convince them, which is why I think you've seen so much controversy now. People are like, oh, this is the representation of America, this is weakness and stuff. And it's because of that not acknowledging how emotions really do affect your nervous system on a real way.
List some people who you think are the greatest of all time.
Well, okay, that's interesting, because I was going to say Jordan first, and I was going to say he's one of the people that thrive under pressure.
Michael Jordan.
And I think that's something that kind of speaks to valuing an athlete who won't let negative emotions affect their physical ability. Those people who thrive under pressure, a lot of times that's what comes to people's minds.
Right.
Because like A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, as a Yankee fan, we always compared him to Derek Jeter. And like we always hated him because we said he choked all the time.
Right.
And even though he had much better stats and everything than Derek Jeter was like mediocre, kind of. He made some good plays. He played hard. but definitely in the clutch, it's like he would do the superhuman thing. Okay. So his nervous system actually went like I don't know what happened, but it actually performed better under the threat of uncertainty.
Jeter was a better captain than A-Rod.
It could be as simple as under the threat of uncertainty, Derek Jeter's nervous system actually went into a more positive space.
Right.
Whereas people who choke, their nervous system goes into a more negative set of feelings when there's the threat of uncertainty. And that's what's more natural. That's what they're wired to do, because uncertainty is the same as the possibility of something bad happening. So your nervous system reacts to it the same way, often, unless like you do things like meditate and like mindfulness is good, and, like, or you have someone like Derek Jeter who learned to thrive under pressure, and we have those people out there.
Do you have anyone else on your greatest of all time list?
With sports?
Yeah.
I've always liked the tennis player Djokovic. I feel like he also thrives under pressure, and he also like he started. Huh?
I have no idea who he
is. He's Czech, and like he was in
early days.
Huh?
So
he was really bad.
This is
for like the first like 3 years of his career, and then like
he wasn't bad because he made it to the pro.
Sure, but I think it's out of like I think it's out of like they have like 150 or 138 kind of rings the bell. They have like 138 pros at any given time, kind of like golf. And he was always down at the bottom for years. And people were just like, all right, he'll be that guy who either never makes it to the tournament or gets knocked out immediately. And he like changed his diet a lot and did like more like movement therapy, which I think is very interesting. It's a way to channel your nervous system. And now he's one of the best. So I've always liked that about him.
Mechanics,
yeah.
So he's a current guy.
Yeah. Kind of on the way out.
Okay.
No offense, but this was years ago.
Not affecting people. I mean, people can get offended about whatever they want. Right? Yeah. You clearly highlighted Jeter over A-Rod. So we got that out the way.
Yeah, that's heavy bias.
Now. So here's the thing, right? Yeah. Here's the thing. As much as I, I'm an activist.
Yeah.
I try to just be rational.
Yeah.
Right? We know that the Olympics is the greatest level of an athlete can reach in humanity. Period.
Yeah.
Right? So we're all building up to it. Right now as we're sitting here on the porch, there's someone swimming, playing, practicing, like for their event coming up or whatever. Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
So I can't do it. I have no critique for anyone who's a professional athlete who's doing it. I have no idea what the level of stress is, and it's also interesting to me to see how they politicize everything. So I'm kind of like watching, and my activist hat wants to go on at the same time.
It is interesting how within like 3 minutes of the Simone Biles thing, it's like every like left and right political commentators on Twitter were like saying what it symbolized.
I mean, I try to be impartial, right? But if I heard any athlete, it's like I got stressed out before my could have been gold medal performance.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
you should be used to that?
You're supposed to perform under this kind of stress.
Yeah.
You know? Like, I couldn't imagine a Michael Jordan saying, I can't play Game 7 because of the stress.
I mean, it's an action that does not, it definitely doesn't fit into what we've thought of as the values of sports.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
So, it definitely goes against those values a little bit. For sure.
I can easily put on my mental health hat and say, oh, that's great. She's prioritizing her mental health.
I mean, I speaking for myself, I was always 1,000 times better in practice.
Right.
Like in high school, than I was in actual games.
Right.
Because I was one of those people who's the opposite. So I will say maybe we're missing out on a lot of potential athleticism by having these attitudes. But again, that would be completely the attitude to change
of
the competition. It's like it is part of it, you know. And that's the magic of sports, though. Yeah, is that
you can be the world greatest in the gym when no one's watching.
Yeah,
but if you can't do it in a game, then none of that matters.
Again, I think like
there's plenty of people who's good.
I don't know if this
in practice. And when the game starts, they're trash.
Yeah,
like an A-Rod situation. You know, it is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, like, does this or does this not symbolize something about America? Does it not, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think it says something about culture. Definitely, the fact that there are people who are like rallying behind her about it says something. Because I think if this had happened in the 80s, say, I don't know what would happen. If someone just like quit because she was stressed, and then something I thought was maybe questionable was she kept on saying like it should be fun. And again, that's bringing a very different value set that I'm sure a lot of people agree with. And I think like, but again, I think what's missing from the argument though is that like, it wasn't that she was just stressed. It was that's why I think it was worded wrong. And people are getting focused on the wrong wording and stuff because I think PR just would have talked up even more like this, like I was stressed, so like feel bad. And I'm saying that's meaning. Saying, you know, she's stressed and feels bad and
she would have been better off saying I twisted my ankle.
That would have been good. But I'm saying on an objective level, that's another example, like twisting the ankle. The fact that she was the part of her brain, she got the twisties. So the part of her brain that orients balance was being impacted by the stress. And that's a little different than performing under pressure, because now an actual like safety concern, I would say, is like on the table.
Stop it. So the question here is, you know,
I didn't answer your question. What does it represent?
We're giving away trophies for participation. I've done 10 marathons and I've gotten 10 medals. Okay, and some of those marathons I didn't train well. Some of them I trained very little, if at all. Yeah. And I know plenty of people who've run marathons without training. My point is, everyone gets a medal for their participation or completion. I shouldn't say participation.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of talk about, you know, we're getting soft.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't really have an answer. I'm just posing the question.
Yeah.
Right? But when I heard, you know, supposedly greatest of all times bowing out at the gold medal competition because of stress, to me, there's no way I can have that conversation now and not talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely true. I mean, I would say, like how I said before, like it's bringing a whole new set of values into things that haven't been there before. So
A part of me,
I think the question is, are those values relevant to that situation? And
right.
maybe there's an argument is maybe they're not relevant to the Olympics because that is like the pinnacle of sports performance. Therefore, performance is always the priority. So I think maybe you could say that that they're not relevant there.
So here's the thing, right?
I think the fact that it's being accepted to a degree, I would say, says more about the culture than what Simone Biles did.
Yeah, she was comfortable enough to say it.
Yeah.
You know, like based on some of the things I've heard about like Russian and Chinese gymnasts, like they wouldn't dare say something like that.
Well, you know, I think this comes to the question of raising cultural consciousness.
Right.
Also. Right. Because that's fear-based and suppression, which can be done. It's a way to achieve objectives,
right?
For sure. But more that traditional idea of what I was saying before of getting negative emotions out of it. You know, like corporate, if you think of it as a mind, traditionally is how do we get negative emotions out of the functionality of our organization, so people are productive and like on task and thinking about the company in a good headspace. Right. You know, you shrink that to the mind of an athlete, and then I would say it's kind of like maybe the Russian and Chinese mindset on like gymnastics is more that, like in terms of negative emotion, how do we like keep it out of it? So it's like, yeah, if you want to be, I think, a more embodied, like being able to connect to your body, feel the whole nervous system at once, because ultimately that's what makes it so hard. And maybe what you are pointing to is the fact that she got the twisties due to the stress, because what that says to me is like because what that is like, people think of, you have the mind and then you have the nervous system. Right. I know this is not something they say, but it's something I got from like social work, is like your whole body is the nervous system. Right. Your mind's a part of it. Right. So I think, and when it comes under stress and stuff, it needs to go into kind of like the reptilian brain, which is very just like survival. Reptiles, when they get cold, they move to the sun. They get hungry, they eat a bug. Like, and that's life. They don't really protect their young. There's no, they just do. Right. You know? Right. It's very robotic in response to stimuli. Emotions bring in this is why it's fascinating. These emotions like mammals have, because they like survive more in like colonies. You know, rodents were like living together in like burrowing in the ground, making mazes together. So like the body needed to feel something like an environmental stimuli, even though it was a social cue. That's like what emotions are. Very interesting. And that's why mammals have them. Right. But like, if the reptile brain turns on, that emotional system goes to like get rid of all the positive stuff. Don't feel happy, don't feel relaxed, none of that. Like, be on edge, be ready to fight, be ready to run. And like, that's where all your emotions go. So the reptile brain comes on and brings like all the complexity that's you to like either or. Right. Now, I think like a Russian or Chinese athlete is probably more in the space of how do you do that and still stay connected to your body. And I think maybe what you see is the evolution of like athletics within our culture, because I don't think we like want to function from that as much anymore. And like something I'm into, I was into mindfulness for a while. Now I'm very into embodiment, because it's more of the idea that like the nerves in your toe are just as much a part of like your nervous system as your brain. And it's like, so you want to be able to stay connected fully to that full nervous system, rather than get flipped into your either or switch. Right. That is going to start turning things off. Right. And it sounds like, you know, when you're stressed, it's like, yes, you will need balance, you know?
Right.
But you're going to need other parts of the brain more.
Right.
Like just to get your muscles tense, which is not going to help. And like increase like breathing.
Right.
Put different hormones into your bloodstream. All this other stuff is happening. And more complex functions, they all get shut down. So what I do see in that is like the focus in training, is that we're not going to go to that fear-based, shut off and still function way of moving, because that's what gymnasts are doing, staying connected to your body. We're not going to force you to stay connected while being stressed. And it was more of a total connection. But then it did get affected by stress. So if anything, it speaks to a difference in training. And could training and the focus in coaching have come from America getting soft? If that's what you want to call it? Yeah. But I think it's coming more, again, do you want to call that soft? And everything, and I would say everything's more complex.
Let me see if
nothing's mutually exclusive if it exists. You know? That's what I'm saying. Just call it soft. There's a simplification. There's a lot flows into that.
Her emotional headspace was not where it needed to be for her to give her best performance.
Well, I'm saying
you're saying that the fact that she was in an environment that allowed her to express this shows that we're making steps forward into us being emotionally aware and emotionally sensitive to an individual, which is a good thing.
Again,
but as an
that's athlete, a lot of meaning. I think what it shows is that her training was not focused on having you stay in touch with your full nervous system under pressure. It wasn't focused on that. Whereas I think if you're coming from a more rigid, like must perform place, well, even coming from that place is going to make things feel like more pressure. But also in that place, it's going to be all about performing under pressure.
Right. And
like, no matter what, you perform. And like, so you need to learn to stay connected with your body as much as you have to, regardless of like your emotional stimuli, you know? Because I think that's something like the 3 parts of the brain, and they speak to each other very separately. So I'm not hearing.
You're the owner of a team.
Yeah.
And this is game 7, and your best player says what Simone says. How do you deal with that as the owner?
I do think that's a little different, because now you're getting down to why does your organization in which this game is being played out, what is the purpose and what sustains that organization? What sustains that organization is performance, for sure. So I would say in that context, it's like, there's really no place for that, because the organization that you are doing that within would die if everyone acted like that. Now, the Olympics is different. It's like the world coming together for sportsmanship. So I think it's different.
I mean, it's definitely worth talking about, you know?
Again, so I would say I do think it speaks to what a lot of people are calling weakness. And I think the people rigidly coming out in support of her are also flawed. I think I've been talking about this issue for like 15 minutes at least. Right. So obviously there's more to talk about than your initial read 3 tweets, and then tweet out something. Like, you know, and say this represents the decline of America. Like, think how many steps you had to take to get to that. And it's likely that there could have been also a lot of other like steps and things that you had to step through to get to that. And to just like, on either side, to say it's a great thing, again, it's more complicated than that. Like, because there is value to being able to perform under pressure. I think something else I learned everyone should learn is attachment theory.
Right.
And it's basically like, it's this idea of how like all mammals, they've studied it the most in humans, perform an attachment with the being that's giving them food, usually the mother. And like from that, it's kind of like their nervous system learns to first recognize that it's not the same nervous system as the mother. And then once it's this idea of separateness, then it starts to, that's a very tough battle to negotiate. Because now it's like, well, now I'm separate. My nervous system isn't reacting well to what this being is doing. And like, now what happens? And it's continual experiencing that, and the mother still continuing the bond that slowly widens this range of being able to have a negative emotion and yet integrate it in. Okay. Not in a relationship dynamic. It's like how do you get to marriage? It's basically like, how much can someone initiate a negative emotion in you, and yet you still don't revert into like separation, it's like this mix of like not only not being like triggered by them, so to speak, but also not feeling responsible for their triggers, which is a form of forgiveness. But you need to be very comfortable with the separation to like fully accept, because if you're feeling responsible for their emotional experience, it just kind of gets, then you can't control it. So now you bring in even more variables into your emotional experience. Right. So they call it the idea of the secure base.
So America's the mother.
So what I'm saying is, every stage, I think life is an expansion of that. Right. And I think it can be thought of as tension. How much like negative emotion and uncertainty, which those things often come together, can your nervous system handle with not wanting to separate from what's going on? And that separation is like fight or flight, going into that reptilian brain, right, becoming either or and simplistic and stuff. So I think, and becoming disconnected from your body. So I think there is real value. I do think it's a huge thing in life to learn to be able to handle more tension without wanting to shy away. Right. And what is tension? It could be defined as a lot of things, but I would say ultimately it's uncertainty. The outcome is not known. And you want to expand that. So I do think, yeah, there is tremendous value in wanting to push the bounds of that. And I find that fascinating. Like this past year, I worked a lot with first responders, getting psych treatment. And like, it's all about that, because they're all traumatized. And that really lowers your threshold to how soon that reptile brain is going to get turned on. Right. And that's kind of like the essence of trauma. It could be on all the time. That's like PTSD is. Right. It's on all the time, and the hormones that come from that just wear you down, and it's a negative feedback loop. And now it's on all the time, and it gets stronger all the time because your brain does what it does in the past. Right. It gets wired to do that. So the longer you traumatize and acting out of that, the more used to and better at your brain gets at acting traumatized and on all the time. So, like a lot of working with them is how do you get them to sit in uncertainty, which is a lot of intense moments, without turning on their reptile brain. Because it's real, you got to get real focused on how to do that, especially when you're a first responder and especially after you've experienced trauma. But at any time, you're going to be in a lot of situations with tension. And the stakes of those tensions, the stakes of those, like the outcome of those moments of tension is important. Right. And the more important that is, it means like the more important those moments are, it means like the more like consequences there are in terms of steps. There's more outcomes that get thrown into uncertainty by the outcome of that. So like for a first responder, death is on the table. Think how many chains of impact that is. So, and your brain knows all of that subconsciously in the moment. So it's very hard to not shift into your reptile brain. And like, I think in terms of like the discussion now, like police brutality and like what needs to be done with that, I think that's a missing piece of the puzzle. They're all traumatized, and there's in the culture there's no acknowledgement of that, which just makes it worse.
The police are traumatized.
They have trauma symptoms, and that's not even me like dissing police. That is like a lot of stats back up that 50% of law enforcement officers
their life on the line every day.
Yeah,
the things that has happened to them while putting their life, even on the days when things don't happen, a tire exploding can trigger.
Yeah, sure. And a lot of these institutions are still founded on things and procedures that came into origin 50 years ago, where there was absolutely no room for acknowledging negative emotions. So on top of that, they're not handled well. So people try to suppress them. So then when they're released, it's always really bad.
Right.
And then, so the only context that other, firefighters, military, police, the only examples they see of emotional stuff coming to the surface, it's always really bad. It's resulting in a fit for duty eval where everything's on the line, which is going to stress you out more. It makes everyone like more stressed, but then no one wants to like come forward saying they're experiencing anything.
Right.
And so with the culture itself is like, there's a lot built up to kind of reinforce not resolving trauma symptoms, which inevitably increases trauma symptoms exponentially.
Right.
And there's a lot of research that says over 50%, and again, that's in a culture that does not acknowledge it, okay? Over 50% of law enforcement has symptoms of trauma. It's a huge thing. It's a huge problem. It's just objectively, that's not what you want out there, So I think that's something has to be done about that. And I think a lot could be. But anyway, I do think there's tremendous value in being able to stay grounded, so to speak, and in touch with your body, not so much in fight or flight, in moments of tension. And I do think like that's what we see in great athleticism. That's what we see like in people who come through in the clutch. So we don't want to give up the value of that. It's amazing. It's an amazing value.
You're also saying that she's a trailblazer and she's brave because she was able to say that and bow out.
I mean, that couldn't have been easy. And I think what it is, does it live? Another saying of mine is like, it's hard for us as like one individual to judge what's good or bad because we're so limited.
That's fair.
Something I say a lot to people is Hitler thought he was a good guy.
Right.
If that's possible,
everyone thinks what they're doing is right.
Yeah,
sure.
It's hard to judge anything, but I think it's complicated because I think what she did was bring up a lot of values that we haven't seen in that context before.
Right.
Because what we've always valued about athletics is seeing people do that amazing thing of perform with their bodies, which is hard to do. Like we want for control of your body,
right?
Which makes it, that's the tension. So to still be able to perform with your body amazingly under pressure is like what people find like so amazing. That's the skill,
Right.
That's why they get paid.
Right. And she didn't do that.
So she didn't do that. And it's like, so that's not what we think of with athletics because we've always been, I think, in awe of that feat. So the people who are coming out in support of her immediately and saying things like, sports should be fun and like, like it's not about winning or losing and stuff. I think that also takes things away from the full picture because now they're taking value away from the tremendous effort and value of being able to perform under tension, which is like that's
the reality of what they're doing.
Life is uncertainty.
Right.
You know, like everything about life, like the origin of life on the molecular level, the molecular level is to bring order where there was chaos. You know, it's everything. You know, life started because there was a bunch of like proteins and molecules like in this soup.
Right.
And they were always like coming together into bigger ones, and then they wouldn't be stable, so they'd break apart.
Right.
And it might have only happened once, but one time, a random group of molecules came together that before it broke apart was able to make a copy of itself.
Right.
In its arrangement. And suddenly you had DNA. And suddenly you had a little bit of order, slightly more order than the chaos around it. And the more complex life got, it was, you could bring more complex like chemical reactions like to a cell, so it could do more things, so it could hold itself together even longer and do more stuff.
How has life changed for you? Like everything, how has what you've taken in grad school changed your outlook?
In a lot of ways. Let me just finish this though. But it's just like, I think the essence of life and being able to grow is being able to still maintain order. And I say that in a very like general sense.
Right.
Predictability. Maintain some sort of predictability in the face of all the chaos that is working against that.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, everything takes continual energy to be put into to sustain itself, because the natural state is chaos. And that's what I think is so amazing about humans being able to do something predictable, maintain order within themselves, if you will, in the state of chaos, in a state of a lot of outcomes and possibilities. That's a form of chaos.
Right.
So I think like to disregard that and say things like, and take this realm where that happens, athletics, and say it should just be about fun, I do think you're missing something very valuable. Right. But at the same time, she's bringing a whole new set of value systems that I think are in that trend of like being able to stay in your body and like work with negative emotions rather than shut them off. It's like something that is new to athletics, or at least voice, I don't think has been given to not doing that. And so I think she's giving voice to like a whole new set of values that's never been there before.
There is a voice for that. And those people stay home and someone else takes their spot.
True.
That's how it works.
The voice has always been kept out. You've never seen a goat say something like this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll catch you up on a few. I asked you that question and we're kind of glossing in. You can come back to it if you want. So
what's up? Yeah, yeah. How long have you been out here? Like 45 minutes? Not that long.
I want to come back to that question, the last one. But so basically,
perspective change. Okay. Yeah.
So basically, you know, there's a lot of things I want to see happen, right? And I'm trying to do what I can with the podcast. And you know, I think it's a lot. All the things that can happen are bigger than the podcast. But one of the things is I want it to be an opportunity for the viewer to get an insight into members of the community, so that they can walk away feeling more like I belong there. So I want people to walk away with a sense of belonging.
Okay.
You know, and I think people are slow to jump into new communities and new groups, and they're cautious about being judged and these kinds of things.
Mm.
And I think I really wanted to just bring forward a human element, right, of the individual, something more vulnerable. And I find that, when you're talking to people in this kind of dynamic, there's this posturing of their better self, their educated self, their career self.
Okay.
They don't cover people who are feeling broken. They're less likely to say yes to come on to the podcast, right?
Okay.
You usually come on to a podcast with a sense of strength and footing.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think community is so important for me to focus on it is that I feel that we're so busy and we've allowed our community systems to break down to an all-time low. And I think everyone sees it and everyone knows that it's there. It's like that cancer that's lurking in your body. You know it's there, but you're not like treating it.
I was kind of saying before with not being in the office anymore.
Right.
How that's going to affect people. Yeah.
Right. So I'm really kind of just trying to shine a light on that, and then have people say, yeah, I could have more community, and they can go do it on their own, and also feel like they have a place within the group for that.
Mm.
So it's not to attack Simone Biles or athletes or all of these things. It's to talk about what humans are going through, the vulnerability, and our societal pressure norms, and how quick we are to weaponize things. That when something happens, it's like, oh, see, this is what we've been talking about, and automatically it's not a moment of reflection. It's just an immediate. This affirms what I've been saying.
Yeah.
So with that said, you were talking about your perspective change.
Well, I think a lot of that is reptile brain stuff. There's a lot more. I think there's a lot of validation to reactivity these days, and that's what social media is.
Right.
Definitely what Twitter is. I think that's the biggest place you see that. Like the more reactive you can be in terms of like emotions and doing it quickly, the better. You'll thrive in that environment. Right. And I think all of social media kind of lends itself to that. And then I think what also I hate social media. And I think also what it does, I mean like on a mass scale, what it does to a culture psychology. I could go on a lot about this. And a lot of it's come from school, because a big thing I've thought about with school is like the nervous system, especially what they call the vagus nerve theory, which is, I forget what it is exactly, but like it runs from your brainstem to your gut. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot about like the gut brain, and like again, it brings emotions that we attach all this meaning to, like shame, anger, fear, and I mean, pretty much any emotion you could think of is some granulized little segment of the three I just said. So, how do you look at yourself? Well, just like seeing it in other people, like those emotions are coming up all the time. I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
What was I saying?
So basically, we were talking about your experience of yourself now through a new lens that you've gained while in grad school.
Right. Okay. So, like vagus nerve theory is saying, like, for when you're one kind of protective thing for your. That was another insight. Your nervous system, which your mind's a part of, it's not the director, so to speak. So that was a perspective shift for me. But like your whole nervous system, the purpose of it is to be able to perceive the environment to protect you.
Right.
There's a lot of things in there that are wired and like are a part of you now. After millions of years of evolution to protect you.
Right.
You know, so like the way it's built to interact with the environment is to protect you. You know, which it's like.
This is one of the things that prevent people from trying.
Yeah.
The fear of failure.
Yeah. And basically,
your body is protecting you from failure.
Yeah.
So it encourages you not to try.
Yeah.
So you're wired to avoid risk, but if you avoid risk, you won't get to your fullest potential.
Yeah.
So Simone Bile took that to a new level. Like she's someone who has trained for at least 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
She's been waking up since she's 4, 5, 6 years old every day, Saturday morning, late Friday night, and doing flips and flips and flips and flips. There's no one more prepared, hypothetically speaking, than her to do those flips.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to let those wirings of fear get into your brain, it's a new level of breakdown. It's understandable that a soldier has PTSD after the war. We kind of understand this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't want your soldiers having PTSD before the war.
I mean, I've also never seen like at that level of sportsmanship. I mean, for that sport, the event of all time. Like I something like at that level, I've never seen the idea of having fun brought up so much. And I think that's what speaks to, it was a different way of training that she probably went through. So like to attack, I don't know, like to conflate that with like a weakness of character and letting the fear into her mind, as you put it. What I'm saying is, for her to have used the word fun, I think 3 times in her post, speaks to, I don't think she was training.
Maybe that was the problem.
Not training enough to keep it out.
Maybe that was the problem. She's doing this for fun.
Well, yeah, but again, it's like, so I think in the past, there was, especially in that sport, because there's a lot of injury and like a lot of pain that's a part of it. Okay, but I mean, you're really like, every time you go in the air, you're liable to break a bone.
Yeah, I don't want to get stuck on Simone Bile's thing either, but
I'm just saying there's a real brutality there can be to that sport. And I think like, so what it begs the question, if she didn't train with so much focus on performing no matter what, if there was more of this element of like training in a state of fun, like that's what leaves you vulnerable to something like this.
Right. Fun is not a part of this. Come on. And let me say this too. Let me add this on, right? So because Simone Biles is Black, the Black community has rallied around her, right? And someone like me, who's just a thinker and just critical of things, we're afraid to say something because it's like, our Black girl is struggling. So, and then in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm sure all of the other climate things in America was also a part of that stress. It wasn't just being in Tokyo, finally.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. I think part of her life got meshed with our
But
pop culture
that's
now,
everyone.
which is like,
That's everyone. Like, that's not something unique that she's going through. Okay? The unique part of this whole thing is no one's ever just sat down when it was time to perform and said it was too much. You know? And so the connection I was going to make is that Michael Phelps, right? And also Usain Bolt, at the time when they stopped Olympic sports, they were the greatest in the world. And they could have trained for 4 more years, but they just chose not to. So partially, I think there's a financial component. I don't need money anymore. So I'm less driven to do this. And yes, you won the most medals ever in your sport. You know, Phelps has the most medals, period.
Yeah.
Right? So there's less of a motivation. You know, you have nothing to prove at that point, right? So I get that. But to me, and Bolt's a Jamaican, and I'm Jamaican. So this is not an attack on America, right? But to me, our culture in general is getting to a point where you're the best in the world. What do you mean you're going to sit at home for the Olympics? Like,
yeah,
I'm still like, you know, it's the same thing they were trying to do to Brady. Like, your contract's up, you should sit at home. Like, I'm the greatest in the world. What do you mean? Like, you know, and this is no fun. I'm going to sit down. Like, what? Like, I'm grouping all those things together to say that I think performance in sport and performance in general. Performance in sport represents performance in general. And we want to be always performing as much as we can, obviously safely, you know. But you have to manage the stress of the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if Phelps and Bolt said, I don't want to go through that stress again, so they stayed home after Beijing. Was it Beijing? Yes, right? 2016 was Beijing.
Was Phelps in Rio?
Rio, sorry.
I think he was, yeah.
So you stay home after Rio. Yeah. That's it. It was too much to stay home. You don't want to wait until the morning of Tokyo to say, you know what, it is too much. So that
was interesting. Yeah.
I would rather you do what Bolt and Phelps did, than what Bile did.
Yeah,
and the fact that she did that with a straight face, still put on her silver medal and smiling, and it's not fun. Like, it says like. So I mean, again, you know, at the same time, I do support wellness. It's not an attack on wellness. It's not an attack on mindfulness. It's saying when that crunch time comes, you're expected to perform.
Yeah.
You know, and on some level, someone did something wrong. If you want to blame the coach and not her, the athlete, fine. You know, but this is not, you can't just say like, oh, she took care of her wellness. Good job. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, okay, yeah. I mean, I think
it's a big deal.
In terms of, I think we generally agree. This is a social work perspective. I see Simone Biles within a much larger context.
Right.
And I think it says less about her, what happened, and more about how, like, the national media has treated it.
Sure.
And, like,
there's more
people on Twitter have treated it. Like, I think, and that's what I say, like, I think, like a huge thing of mine is like just thinking about things in terms of nothing is mutually exclusive if they both exist. Okay, and I think what we saw for a long time is the attitude of there's no place for that in sports, and totally valuing the idea of performing under pressure and being great under pressure. That's what was great, and to the total exclusion of this other stuff. And I think the reaction to this of just being like, oh, this is great. Like, yeah, health is more important than stupid sports. Come on. Like, I think that is also dropping a major aspect of the truth. And I like, at the end of the day, like, it happened and something new happened and a lot of things got brought to the table. And either way of thinking about it is not the full truth. Is what is.
I like that. I like that.
I think so. I think there's a lot lost to just applaud. I think the fact that that was able to happen. Like, I think there was a time that wouldn't have been up to her.
Yeah.
Probably not even that long ago.
Right.
You know, and like they probably, here's another thing. I'm sure, like, I forget them now, but like that's something I used to read about. Like a lot of athletes had like rituals to get rid of the stress and get them in the zone beforehand. From what I've read about her prep and like what practice went like that day, because I've seen like there's been a lot of focus on what was practice like that day.
Right.
I didn't hear any mention of, you know, I went and did this ritual and it didn't work. I haven't heard that. So maybe that speaks to something, but it speaks to the idea that like that wasn't the goal here. Like, and I like that's what we speak to. I don't know. Like what we think of is like the greats a lot. I think they have like some ritual that gets them to like somehow compartmentalize that for a little bit, or turn it around. Learn how to work with that energy. And I would say, again, I also think of her age a lot because she's Gen Z, and they've been on screens from like birth, essentially.
Right.
In terms of what I was talking about before, about life's this journey of being able to handle like tension and not disconnect, like a big part of that is internal experience that will initiate tension, negative thoughts, negative emotions. Like, can you feel really shitty about yourself and still not disconnect? That happens in moments of like solitude and boredom when your brain has nothing else to do.
Right.
And yet it's still there.
Right.
It's a magical time.
Right.
Boredom is, I think, one of the biggest things we've lost as a culture.
Absolutely.
To always have the phone there, because it's like in those moments of boredom where it's like you get to face all this shit is happening around you, and then you're left with the fact that you're still there. And I feel like it's a little experience of being able to integrate the negative thought and expand how much internal tension you can contain. As far as I'm concerned, and it's not to diss Gen Z, but like it's something I've seen like in working with kids. It like definitely there's way more reactivity because they're reacting to their own internal experience because there is no boredom. And like, so I think it could be like a generational thing too. From what I'm hearing there was her range of being able to tolerate stress and not let it affect her body, not activate fight or flight. It wasn't as great. Right. It wasn't that high.
Right.
They call it your window of tolerance.
Right.
How much you can handle before your survival brain comes on. And that's stress. The survival brain is stress. That's stress reaction. And like, so your window of tolerance, how wide can you make it? You know, that's like what martial arts was all about. You know, it's where mindfulness comes from. Like, it's mostly like martial arts. And then it got filtered through like Western PhD programs. and
very much so.
Spat out as the
very
mindfulness program. But so much of it comes from martial arts tradition, which is like this warrior tradition of how do you like put the negative energy and negative experience, like not get rid of the energy, but still channel it into some sort of flow. And it sounds like she didn't do that.
This podcast has an entrepreneurial element to it.
Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, you need that skill that you're talking about.
Sure.
Being able to block out all the noise, get in the zone, and create, still produce, still perform, to get all the negative feedback in the world, all the stress in the world, and keep going. You know, have things be a complete failure and not.
That's a big one.
And not close the idea saying it's a bad idea.
I mean, what that is you're learning not to fear chaos.
Right.
Because a bad outcome is a form of chaos.
Right.
You know, and that's what it is. I mean, I read a little bit about I've read a little bit about Richard Branson coming up. Like everything's it was now it's like a company, but it was all entrepreneurial.
Right.
And it was like from like middle school age, he like decided to start his own paper and like pretended to like have a secretary, so people would think it was a more official business.
Right.
And through that, he was able to get like advertisers to put stuff in his publication, and then like the money was there. But he talks about like growing up, and his parents were always like, they were like, yeah, try that, like, oh, that's not crazy, try that.
Yeah.
To the point where, and I think like, man, if you have enough of a range where you're willing to try anything, like the idea of like using pretend voices to eventually start one of the biggest companies in the world. And that's something that like we would like think of it like, I don't know, some weird comedy movie.
Yeah.
You know, so but I think it speaks to like that range of not worrying about the outcome, which is another way to phrase how willing am I to be me in a moment of chaos, you know? Not go into fight or flight and want to react, change, run away.
So that's a skill we all need.
Yeah,
right?
big time.
When you have someone yelling in your face, it's easy to just react. And it's another thing to process, stay grounded, and to consciously act in a rational way. And I think that's what you were saying about the police and having to
definitely. Because rationality is not, once that reptile brain comes on, you're not rational anymore.
So one of the things that I've learned is that everything's connected, right? And you start off talking about, gymnastics and social work, and now it applies to police officers and entrepreneurs. You know? So a lot of times people say, well, what is the podcast about? And it's about a little bit of everything. Really trying to connect the dots so that we can get unstuck and move forward in life.
I mean, that window of tolerance, how much tension you can, how much conflict you can handle, how much things you don't like can you handle within yourself. And that's kind of like, your terms like acceptance and self-compassion and like forgiveness and stuff. What that is trying to expand how much things you don't like about yourself can you tolerate within yourself, so you don't get like caught up about wanting them out.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you thought them, they're in there. They're a part of you now. And it's when you fight that and want to escape it, a lot of times that's when we go into like fight or flight. And that's why like shame is a form of fight or flight. Shame is something within you, some aspect of you don't want there. I mean, just on an energetic, like what do you put energy into? That's why it's so bad, something like shame and like bad self-image and stuff, because literally it's like a conception of you're wishing wasn't a part of you. So within your own mind, before anything even leaves your actions or behavior, within your own mind, it's fighting and doesn't want part of it to be there. So like that's why acceptance, self-forgiveness, and that stuff is good. But I think in general, it's like a lot of people do that stuff to get rid of it. If they learn to accept, then they'll feel better. But then they go a step further and be like, oh, well, now it's not there anymore. you gotta, and that's what I think it's like, that integration. Like it's all a part of me. Like something else I like to say to people is like, everyone is beautiful. Everyone's a piece of shit. Yeah. And if you don't think you are, I don't know.
You have some self-work to do.
Self-work. Yeah. And
sure.
So it's a denial of the truth on some level. And the flaw in that is it's a truth within you. So you're denying yourself on some level. That's why it's so backwards. But
there are some unpleasant parts of the self.
Yeah.
And there's some beautiful, amazing parts of the self, both existing within all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to argue that, do it somewhere else.
I heard this concept of a hole-on the other day, and it's just what it means is a part of a whole.
Okay.
And as soon as you said everything being connected, I kind of thought of a conception for God the other day. everything is a whole on except God. I think that's kind of like how I think of it. It's like, so everything's a part of the whole,
Right.
except the whole.
Right.
Which I don't know what you want to call that, but
right.
Like, so yeah, everything's connected. That's why I like that. That's why I like that expression. Nothing's mutually exclusive if it exists, because it's here.
Nothing
Another thing I like is
vacuum.
Nothing's true, even if it's in one person's head.
No, say it again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nothing. Oh, everything is true, even if it's in one person's head.
I like
because
to say,
within their consciousness, it's true.
Right. I like to say that, related to that, if you feel something, that makes it valid.
Well, it makes it there.
You're right. You're right.
Exactly. Valid, I think we attach the meaning of like right or should be.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far, but it's there, and you can't deny that. Right. I'm just like,
and usually I say that when people are suspicious of something or they kind of suspect something, and I said the fact that you walked into a neutral situation and felt my safety is in jeopardy or it implies that yes, it's valid. You should respond. So sometimes you walk into a situation like, should I be scared? Like the fact that you feel that, there's some validity to it because you felt it.
Again,
and I mean, obviously,
I don't know what you mean by validity.
It's
there, so you can't deny it. So you might as well accept it.
Right.
I wouldn't call that valid, though.
Right. If you're in a relationship and you feel like it's not good for you, the fact that you feel that, the fact, it doesn't matter if it's the person or not. Like some people start to get rational, like, well, are they doing something to me? Like, are they achieving? Is it? None of those things matter. Just the fact that you feel it.
Here's what I'd add.
When I say valid, I mean you should look into it.
Yeah. Here's what I would add. Yeah, definitely. Like on top of that, I think if a feeling happens, a lot of people, especially with negative feelings, a lot of people, their automatic reaction to that or the interpretation they take from it is that something must be changed or escaped. And I think it should be, you should ask. Like, if you have a negative reaction to something, first you got to acknowledge it's a reaction. And I think that's what I would call acceptance. It's like, this is a part of me now. There's something to listen to here. But do remember, we're not in full control of our emotions. And sometimes, like, emotions come from both external and internal stimuli. So, you might, an experience from childhood that you don't even really remember on a conscious level gives you a moment of fear, especially with things like social anxiety, gives you a moment of fear when you hit a new situation. Now, you shouldn't wish that away. You shouldn't wish I wasn't feeling that or go into that headspace of I shouldn't feel this way. Definitely not that. And I think that's what you're saying. But you should be like, where's this coming from? And what action do I want to take? Right. And, it is, and then, because I think what you're saying is to assume it's valid, well, that might mean you feel justified in leaving. Right. When it could be, maybe this is an opportunity to, like, reteach my brain something. Right. Like, last time, like, as a kid, when I was in a situation, like, with this, something bad happened. But a big thing I got from school, like doing group therapy, because there's a lot of people coming at you, and it could definitely arise feelings of uneasiness. Right. But it's the meaning we attach to that I think comes wired a lot of times from childhood. And I'd have a lot of moments of, like, anxiety. If I could view those moments as there's a gland, like, right here, and the thinking part's here. Okay? So if there's a gland all the way down here that is just producing a reaction according to, like, based on something, and, like, all that was like, it went from my visual cortex straight there. Doesn't go to the thinking part first. So if you can recognize that, like, and then, again, like, emotions come secondary to internal and external stimuli. They're kind of like, I love them because they're, in terms of your nervous system, they're kind of like this in the middle thing, you know? So, like, if a situation made that hormone come out a little bit, that's conditioning. And it may not necessarily be something that your thinking mind would ever think is a logical reason to have emitted that hormone.
Subconsciously, there's a childhood connection.
Yeah. There. And it's something I learned a lot, especially with groups. One of the best advice I got was like, if you find yourself like feeling that, remember that fact. It's an automatic body process. It's your nervous system doing something that it's wired to do. Protect you and interact with the environment. Okay? That's what it's meant to do. It's not meant to help you like do your job good, per se. So if you could acknowledge that fact, feel it, and then ask, am I safe right now? It's a moment of growth. It's a moment of like retraining. But like I would say a big thing I got from school also is just how the brain is built. You got the reptile brain on the bottom, which is just very robotic, like something happens, reaction. You have your emotional brain, which is trying to tie the automatic reactions to more complex things so you can like feel things in your body as if they were an environmental stimulus, but from things around you, social things, like the meaning of things, you know? And then on top of that, we have the thinking brain that can actually like weigh cost benefit and stuff. Like the frontal cortex, that's the thinking part of the brain. It evolved out of like, it's an expansion of this little part in your like reptile brain, the motor cortex, which basically just like controls movement. And within that, there's a little section, like even if you look at a lizard, very little section that will kind of anticipate what would happen if you do that. Now for a lizard, that's only going ahead to like, if I put my foot there, it won't land on something hot. And that's where like the motor cortex kind of has this little bit of like, see the future thing. With humans, that has exploded. But it's still part of your nervous system meant to protect you. That's all the thinking brain is. And it's like this part of the brain that is able to conceptualize and conceive of something that will happen based on what my motor cortex does, you know, and it is expanded to such a degree. But that's the top, and it's very flawed. And you know, it wasn't meant. It's not evolved to give us ego and a sense of self and personality and all this stuff. That's all like side effects of being able to conceive of future possibilities to a massive degree. But it's not meant to give you a healthy self-image and all that. And it's built on top of, it's kind of like, so it's built on top of the reptile brain that is just like, I'm going to help you mate, eat, and not get killed. And that's it. And like, so, you know, there's nothing inherently bad about that, but that's how it thinks about things. And then you add the emotional brain on top of that. And that's where like things can get tricky, because then it's like, you know, if I like, let's say, I don't know, actually I do remember getting these chairs with you. Well, let's say, let's say you had some like bad experience getting these chairs, and you look at them, and there's this little like negative emotion that you have with it. Now your reptile brain can take that negative emotion and interpret it the same as like something threatening, because it's a negative feeling, and turn on. And that it emits stress. And then your emotional brain hears that and is like, oh, we should be stressed right now. What does that mean? And then it wants to give meaning. Well, I guess, because the emotional brain is very in the social context. So it's like we see so many similarities with dogs. Like their emotions are in the context of the cat, you know? So it's very similar to us. And like, if you want to think about it that way, they have a piece of their nervous system that lets them do very complex interactions with other beings that also have nervous systems. That's what emotions are, you know? So then you have the emotional brain reacting to that. And then on top of that, all of this has already happened. multiple back and forths between your emotional brain either being triggered or maybe having triggered your reptile brain based on nothing. And then on top of that, you have the thinking brain, which is merely there to avoid negative outcomes. So it's kind of like ideally, the thinking brain would be the basement, the foundation of the house, and the logical judgments and decisions of what you would want to do would be the core of your action. Right. And then on top of that, you'd have the emotional brain to add in personality and being able to interact with people. And then on top of that, you'd have the survival brain that would help you avoid getting killed and mating and getting food. But it's the opposite. So it's really the reptile brain, that focus on survival is the foundation. Right. And then you have the emotional brain, the house, everything that happens back and forth. And then the thinking brain is just the roof that was put on top of it. Right. And if anything falls under the roof, it's going to collapse. You can have some holes in the roof and it won't collapse. So that's why it evolved that way. You could live absolutely that way. But that's another perspective thing I got from school. Everyone's like this. And you want to ask, and looking at social media especially, or just what you were talking about before of looking at everything through the lens of how does this support me now and stuff. And especially with trauma, you want to ask, are people's reptile brains talking to each other right now? Or is it the whole brain? And I think you see a lot of reptile brains talking to each other right now. You see the foundation of the house kind of.
So the important thing with that, one of the other themes is media, is that media informs how we think.
Yeah.
Right? So what you're talking about is learning to control your mind, learning to control your brain and how it's going to impact the way you view the world. But
understanding how it does. That's the first step. And then maybe you can do something about it.
Right. And controlling it. You need to.
It's recognizing what's you.
If you want to get ahead in this world, you're going to have to master that on some level. Yeah. If not, you'll be breaking down in key moments like what happened.
It's recognizing what's you. What's a true. If someone wants to look this up, Winnicott, Winnicott. He was a child psychologist. Okay. He was the one who talked a lot about the window of tolerance kind of thing, and how much conflict can you integrate without wanting to separate from it.
I was saying the media is training us to respond in a reptilian way.
Yeah.
So when things happen, instead of trying to process it in a deep analytic way, it's this immediate kind of who does she?
There's a lot of pressure to identify with the right thing very quickly, rather than figuring out what the right thing is. I think.
Right, and that normalizes people not thinking things through.
Yeah.
And I think, from this conversation, I'm thinking, and I feel
I remember what I was going to say. He talked a lot about what's called intrapsychic impulses, which, if you want to call it, that's the true self. Those would be your impulses if you weren't getting messages of basically threat from the environment. Okay. Once that happens, now it starts inhibiting your natural impulses, and we start doing that from infancy, moderating our true impulses if we perceive threat. And what's complicated about the human mind is thoughts and feelings can be interpreted as threat. So, you
have natural reactions, and over time you develop another layer of
inhibiting
of reactions based on
you develop another. He called it your false self, which is basically, because it happens so young, it's wired very deep, but it basically is a conditioned way of responding to threat.
Okay.
So you have a set of impulses that are conditioned to respond to threat, and then you have your core impulses. Right. So he called that your true self and false self. And as you get, since they develop so young, when you're like under 1 year old, it's very, and then they expand as you get older, and that's like what parenting is. They can help with that. But like as you get older, both impulses will sound like you. Right. That's really like the root of addiction. Most addiction is some sort of self-medicating, right? And you're self-medicating that false self. That false self is wanting to throw out perceptions of threat a lot, and so a lot of drugs will silence that. So you get to be what you think of as your true self. But at the end of the day, you're taking something, so it's not your true self, and that's right. That's kind of the journey of addiction, I would say. But like in general, I think so. I think understanding the brain in that way, you want to go into every interaction. I think it's helped me a lot, and it helps people to try to decipher between what's my real impulse and what is my like false self, fear-based impulse, because they both come from very deep places, right. And they'll both sound like you, so to speak. Right. But that's why I think this understanding of the brain can help. Because ultimately it comes down to, what do I actually want to do? Do I want to act on the true me, or like fear me?
Right. And like, so one of the things we're trying to counteract is the normalization of fear that we have. People fear immigrants. They fear people of color taking their job. There's all this like fear. So how do we break that down? I think it's self-analysis, doing the self-work.
Yeah.
But as a culture, I think we need more conversations with each other to understand each other more.
I think that's why I liked what Simone Bile did, because she brought negative emotion to the table. And yeah, I do think that conversation needs to be had, because I think there needs to be an acceptance of it. And the fact that she even brought it up and it's being talked about, that's a form of acceptance.
Right.
Because now it's here. Instead of ignoring it, we're actually talking about it. And even if it's not a fully positive conversation, it still exists. Therefore, it's there. Therefore, it's a form of acceptance. Right. At the end of the day, I think you both need to be embraced, and it's not that you want, and that's the difference. It's not that you want to act on fear and negativity by bringing it into the conversation. It's that we already are.
Right.
So we might as well talk about it so we can start to figure this out. Like, not to shit on Russia or China, but I think on some level, maybe America's at a higher consciousness. And that's why this is happening on our team.
We're definitely more focused on mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a strong audience for mental health and those kinds of things. Absolutely.
I got a fortune cookie. I think one thing you could do is just talk about this a lot. I got this fortune cookie recently, and I put it in front of my driver's license.
The thing one fears most is fear.
I loved it. If you notice, I put this over my identity. It's very poetic to me.
Right.
But I think it's great. And
so what do you fear?
I mean, I don't know. I fear a lot of things. I don't know if that's as relevant to the fact of I want to focus on acknowledging that throughout the day, as I go out through the day. I mean, I would say I still have I'll get I don't want to call it social anxiety, but I can get anxious before social situations because I'm fearing people's judgments, or I'm feeling the way they're going to react. Right. Now, I've become very aware of that. And with the combination of understanding like where that comes from, you know, which again, it's like, you know, fear of judgment usually comes from some sort of shame. Shame is a very early reaction on the part of your emotional nervous system that lets you know there's something more powerful than you. You know, that's why dogs can feel shame. That's what it is. It's usually after a fight. You hang your head and they hang their tail. A lot of animals you see, like they fight with mammals. They fight and then like they get this posture. And like it's very interesting to do. Like I love remembering that it's part of your whole body, because when I'm feeling that, like anxiety is usually like kind of a very like surface level of what we feel. It's literally like cortisol and stuff in your bloodstream. Right? That's the feeling. And then we attach a lot of meaning to it. Under it, especially with things like social anxiety and like anything related to interacting with people, it's usually coming from some apprehension about how you're going to be perceived and judgment. And so that usually comes from shame, which is like it's like a very simple, like mammals have, mice have it. It's a very like simple, like emotional nervous system reaction that lets you know something's more powerful than you. So you should, and like when you think about it, at least the way I experience it is I kind of like get tense here. I want to contract my chest. I want to bend, like I feel tension kind of here. I want to bend the neck. And I'll usually kind of like, instead of like kind of being more extended through like the back of my legs. Right. So I'd be more like this. I go more like the front of my legs. All that's the fetal position. Right. And so it's like your nervous system. So when you feel shame, we attach all this meaning to it because you have the conceptual part of your brain being told this emotion by your emotional brain. And now it's like, well, I need to attach meaning in everything because I like to predict things. And in order to do that, I must label it and understand and assign meaning of what it will mean in the future. Right. So, like, that's why I've been thinking about emotions in a totally different way of how they come from. Like, they're a nervous system reaction. They're not who you are, which I think, like, comes a lot. But anyway, shame. So, in the animals, shame is telling them you should contract because there's something more powerful than you. And again, it's like, it's in the social context, right? You know, so it seems more advanced to us. But like when people say, so sometimes dogs seem like so human. It's like, no, you actually, you're recognizing how you're like every other mammal. You're able to see it in a dog, you know? Like emotions are very real. And they're just as real in dogs as in us. Right. You know, it's the nervous system. It's the meanings that we attach to them. So what is shame? That's programming. That's that thinking brain as a child who doesn't know anything, trying to assign meaning so they can understand this feeling and avoid it because it's a threat by like attaching all these things to it. So then we learn, so it was just shame, which kind of says some things like better than us. And in terms of social anxiety, like if you're worried about someone's judgment, on some level, it's tapping into, maybe not that they're better than you, but there is like a force that were they to judge you, then they'd be better than them. Right. You know, your brain is making all these connections like very, very fast. And so, that's where the flawed childhood programming comes in. Because that feeling of shame, like, doesn't actually mean this person is better than you. Right. But that's how we want to. So shame, the response that it's just a protective factor, we attach the meaning of, oh, this person's better than me. I'm a piece of shit. Like, I'm flawed. I'll never be this. I'll never be that. If I don't do this, I'll never be good enough. We put all of that over, like, just a neurological reaction that would signal a goat after it butted heads and lost. Right. The same thing that's telling you you're shameful. It's the same thing that tells the goat, I have to hang my head and not mate now. Right, it's the same thing. Yeah, so we attach like I'm a horrible person, and that's what I mean. You want to question. You want to question things like that.
So what you're saying exactly ties into a book called The Kabbalion by the Three Initiates.
Okay.
Have you heard of this?
No, that sounds cool.
This book is in my top 3 books that humanity needs to know about.
Yeah.
It has a lot. To me, it's like a companion to the Bible. That, like, it's super deep. It's super scientific, right? Basically, one of the things it's talking about, one of the things it talks about is the 7 principles, right? And one of the principles talks about as above, so below, and mental alchemy.
Okay.
And that's what you're talking about, right? You may have this feeling, but you are able to transmute whatever you're feeling, and you're still able to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. Not to let those feelings and emotions control you. You control that.
Yeah.
So that's what successful people do.
Yeah.
And the book is giving you science behind it and a lot of other metaphysical things.
Okay.
But definitely in line with that.
I'd be interested to read that. Yeah. I shy away from words like transmutation and stuff because for me, I really loved what's helped me through this is realizing how kind of automatic these processes are. You know, like someone I really like listening to, he's like a Jesuit Catholic lecturer, Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R. But he has a lot of stuff about, you know, the judging mind and how it wants to seek control. And that's in contrast to, you know, with our small perspectives, like, who are you to judge? Yeah. What's going on? Like, you know, like on some level, and I see it in science too. Like a lot of times I like thinking of God as like the singularity that was the Big Bang. You know, everything like came out of that. You know, and life is just like a state that's happening right now because the explosion that was the Big Bang has like cooled down enough, so things aren't just burning. I think
that's exactly what people who talk about the Big Bang say it is.
Yeah.
So that's
but see, I see God in that because that means everything that has led up to now has been a chain reaction of like 13 billion years of events leading up to this moment. Absolutely. So it's like, what do you say to them? In a way, it's like, who are you to judge what's going on? So many things have led up to this moment, and like you can't deny the power of that.
Right.
You know? But at the same time, and I think this is how I read the Bible, is like at the same time, you're 13 billion. You're 13 billion years in the making.
Right.
And so that's amazing too. And where I think it goes another step further is like, that means everything in your mind, it's happening. It wouldn't have happened without everything that led up to your brain. So everything in your mind, your internal experience, all that shame and judgment that you feel is also 13 billion years in the making. So like for me, like the way I read the Bible is kind of like, how do you navigate the balance of and again, I think that relates to the human condition of bringing order to chaos.
Right.
Like, how much can you appreciate your powerlessness, and how much can you use your power to manipulate reality in the right way, that you're not like going against it, you know? And for me, that's kind of how I read the Bible. So I find this interesting because I think a big part of that is like, I think relating it to mental health. And again, this comes from thinking about how nothing's mutually exclusive. Right. You know, the fact that I've never heard anyone say the Big Bang is God. Because I feel like people think of them as separate things.
Yeah, I mean,
but like that. But that's where I see like the science and religion kind of merging. It's like what is science? It's like you're through a deeper understanding of what reality is. Like the more you can manipulate it,
and investigation.
It's the human experience. You have some ability to manipulate reality and not purely be powerless to it. But how do you ride that? And how do you not beat yourself up about failing? Or, that's all the forgiveness. Forgiveness is divine. I think that's what it is.
That's a mental gymnastics that we're all trying to do. Absolutely. Mike, we've had a good conversation today. I feel like we really centered in on emotions and understanding the control we do have and what does it mean, and inviting us to pay more attention to it.
Yeah,
I think these things are very important, and I think
again, because paying attention doesn't mean accepting.
Right.
But it's happening anyway, so you should pay some attention.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have to do anything about it even yet.
Right.
You can't do anything until you've paid attention. So
first step.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's what's lost. Culture wants to go very quickly to doing something.
Yeah, we jump over thinking and we're already acting, and yeah, I mean the girl just made the announcement. Thank you so thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for making it happen, man. Mm-hmm. Any final words you want to leave us with?
I just, not to toot my own horn, but a lot of these ideas like can be seen everywhere. That the idea of window of tolerance, and the idea that your brain is built in a very flawed way. And like the part that we've been, at least in Western society, I think has been taught to value the most, which is that frontal cortex, which is able to analyze and conceive of the future. It does so based on information that's coming through the brain of a lizard and the brain of a mouse. And then you get the information.
Right.
And what's magical about that, and I think what maybe I see getting lost in society as it gets more reactive, is not acknowledging where the information's coming from, which is not up here, but it's that brainstem, and it's that mammal brain first. And I think, again, the more you could not think of things as mutually exclusive, and you can ask, how do these things relate? How are they the same? The more you'll see. And you can ask questions like, what is this conversation happening at my lower levels of brain? Ask that question. Because I would say what makes us human is that this part of the brain can actually gain an understanding of this conversation. But it needs to give it that attention. And you're not going to give it that attention until you acknowledge that it's happening. And it's happening whether you you acknowledge it or not. I would say it'll probably bring you more peace and more grounded decisions, but now you're striving for an outcome, which is those lower parts of the brain are immediately going to compare whatever reality and whatever you did and however you feel against the outcome you want, which is peace. And I would say that's probably the constant battle as you go into this conversation is, and I think that's where kind of like religion can help, is, how can you find peace with not striving for peace? And it's kind of recognizing that peace is not having any desire for peace. So
yeah, inner peace is about having a sense of joy in the present moment, regardless of what that moment is.
Yeah.
Right?
Or at least being able to be in it. And that's that window of tolerance again, that being able to stay you and not revert to your false self in moments of conflict and tension.
Self-awareness and self-exploration are you need to use a lot of that to get to these conclusions that we're talking about. So whatever ways you go about that self-exploration, that's up to you. You can do that with a mental health professional. You can do that with your journaling. You can do that by talking to a friend. Those are the primary ways, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's basically a self-work that needs to happen between you, and if you're not ready to talk to someone outside, then just self-explore with your journal, or just take some quiet time. That's what meditation is. It's a quiet time where you should be focusing on the inner, they call it the monkey mind, or whatever is going on there. You want to pay attention to it and start to connect the dots and give names to things, and not just let it happen every time. You should begin to already know, like, all right, this person gets this response, this thing makes me feel, and we're all on loops, going through things over and over. That's the beauty of life. Going to sleep, waking up, you start again. It puts you back on this loop every day. So as you go through the loops more and more, you should kind of know what you feel like at midday, afternoon, evening, up to bedtime. And as you variate, you should pay attention to that. What's causing me to variate? Is it because of what I ate? Is it because of what someone said? Or is this just a normal fluctuation? You should begin to learn these patterns. And as you evolve over time, you should be able to control these things so that your mood is exactly what you want it to be, so you can perform at those key moments.
Be your true self.
Right.
And I would say meditation and journaling is helpful with that, because I don't like a lot of the apps and stuff. The goal is to feel a certain way by the end of it.
Right.
And again, I think that negates everything I'm saying, because then it's like now you're thinking about an outcome. And like, if you have created an outcome you want, your brain, no matter what, has now conceived of the outcome. A part of it wants that outcome. And it's going to compare whatever your outcome is at the end of the meditation against the one you wanted. So for me, meditation wasn't helpful until it was like a purely observational exercise. And I think what it can be is like you choose 20 minutes or whatever to be like, let me just look at what I'm feeling.
Take time.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah. And don't try to change it. Just try to see it. And like, again, and then in terms of that, remember, your brain does not control your nervous system. It's part of your nervous system.
How does one control their nervous system?
You can't.
There's no way to control your nervous system.
You can't control your nervous system. You can understand it. And there's incredible power in understanding it, though. But you can't control it because it's a purely open system.
Got it.
It's built to interact with the world.
I guess you can control it by deciding what you expose it to.
You can I think that's why like the media you consume is very important, because like your nervous system, the entire purpose of it is to be able to perceive your environment around you. So it's a completely open system. It's you learn things because your brain literally changes itself a little bit in response to what's going on.
Exactly.
So and then your nervous system is like feeling everything. And then your nervous system feels what you feel. So everything about it is about the world around you, and it's a very open system. So you can't control it.
Well, you have to decide what you expose yourself to.
Yeah.
That's going to influence.
And you can understand how it reacts.
Over time, you decide what you expose yourself to, and that's going to shape and mold you.
Yeah.
And I continue to talk about media because most of us are consuming a lot of media, and it's charging us up one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think...
And we don't choose when we consume it anymore either.
And I think one of the things is that when you have two people going to two ends of the spectrum and they've consumed a certain amount of media, now you're both charged up. And then when you come together, it's not about listening or understanding. It's about just that energy butting heads. The fight or flight, the primal just gets unleashed.
Yeah.
And then you have things, you know, like Donald Trump and all of these things that were like.
I could come on again and talk about how I think this relates to politics, because it does in a lot of ways.
It does, absolutely,
you know?
Absolutely. All right, so let's end, man. We did it.
Pleasure.
All right.